And great thanks to all the community organizations who continue to support them, because we know that they keep someone's time. And my second comment is that I really believe that art is a way to make a statement and say, I believe in the future. And it's also a way to help community members feel seen and honored. And so to that end, I've been able to talk to some people in the community who are interested in bringing public art to our facility. And I would welcome an ongoing conversation and community participation and input to that. So to be continued.
Thank you.
Marcus Hall. One is echo and thank reminder for still suffering from the impact of the levee break in Tahoe. I want to share some good news that started that been released in press that we have the new CTO, Don Young. This would be a wonderful bit for our community. I'm excited about having a strong CEO who's be a great partner with all the work we're doing at the hospital district. So I want to thank and acknowledge and welcome Don Young to our community and hopefully to come to the board meeting in course or to come introduce herself to us.
Okay, we're moving on to the consent calendar.
Oh, I know we have to do public comment.
I know we did that.
For consent.
We have no hands raised.
Hey, anybody in the public that's present tonight?
Then
Okay.
I'll move staff recommendation and check.
Do we have a second?
Second, Katie.
Pardon me?
Katie seconded.
Thank you. Cox,
Yes.
Gallagher,
Yeah.
Nunez,
That's
Pimentel,
Here.
Chair Frail.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So item number 4 is limited authority retirement plan amendments.
I believe that was on consent.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Lisa, it was.
Discussion. CEO report. Michael?
Thank you, Chair Creel. Few items to go over tonight, some that we've discussed, others that you'll hear for the first time. Julie and I met with the Community Foundation and Seneca County Bank to go over our proposal for a loan, line of credit. We are still working with them. Julie will be presenting information in her financial report tonight that outlines our turnaround plan, the documents that we'll be sharing with people going forward. Present at that meeting were Matt Clemens from Driscoll's, Susan True from the Community Foundation, and Bill Bernard Bank, as well as Brent Gutton from the bank, and Kurt Schmidt, who is one of the donors sponsors of the foundation. It was a good meeting, more discussion to be had. I think you can continue on that line. On the GI recruitment side, we have a GI doc that will be signing shortly. His name is Luke P. LPI. He's going to be coming to us on a part-time basis, working through Coastal Health Partners and providing coverage to the facility. So it'll we'll regain some coverage base, but not the full coverage that we previously had. On April 6th, we were part of a Sentinel interview, which Bill participated in as well. It was Julie, myself, and June, once from the foundation, were interviewed by the Seneca's editorial board. I haven't seen anything released yet, but that went well. They were very interested in what we were doing and the updates of the facility in the district. Also on April 6th, we participated in the Seneca Chamber Annual Awards Gala, where the project and the district were both honored for the work to save the hospital. So that was an exciting event. Many of you were participants. On April 12th, I participated in the City of Watsonville Technical Advisory Committee for their general plan, discussing housing element issues, needs and opportunities. So we were very excited to be part of that process and look forward to continuing working with them. For our facility, we conducted a town hall meeting on April 13th. We had about 75 participants, employees that attended. The meeting was really good. We have a couple of slides for the town hall. We discussed a lot of different topics. Board member Gallagher was present for the afternoon session. We talked, provided an update on the current status of the facility, which is typically new, and we were prepared to answer any questions. There weren't too many questions. There were no questions related to CEO search at that meeting, but it was. I thought it was good. The mood, the tone of the meeting was much different than what we've experienced in the past. It wasn't very contentious. It was very collaborative, and the attendees that normally attend were there as well. So it was exciting to feel the change of tone, and I think our culture shift is starting to happen. We talked over quite a few things. We provided a bit of education on the board meeting structure. We tried to clear some of the confusion that our employees have experienced with this process as it is new to them. We talked about our current priorities, stabilization efforts. We also talked about reinvestment and continuing improvements, and the fact that really from a reinvestment standpoint, we're just not in a position to do that at this time, but that is definitely the goal and the commitment of the organization to reinvest in the company and in our staff. We conducted a Meet the Grant Writers meeting on April 19th for our department leaders.
Sorry, Matt.
That's okay. Where the grant writers that we're working with came and presented to our department leaders to give them some background and education. For most of our folks, this is a new process, and so they were excited to hear from the actual grant writers the needs, what they would need for grants, and how to go through that process. So it was very good, well attended. I attended the second Harvest Food Bank Strategic Planning Retreat on April 21st at Seascape. So we were able to participate in their sessions with their new CEO, Erica. That was exciting and got to meet a lot of the community folks, several of the people that were instrumental in saving our organization as well. Our students from PV High School and Watsonville High School were continuing those sessions on Thursdays, well attended, and the students are really enjoying themselves. We have different leaders from the organization presenting to the students and talking about their different areas of expertise and giving them some background. The students have been very excited to hear that it's not just doctors and nurses that work at hospitals, which is kind of a misconception often. On the strategic planning front, we'll be conducting our mission, vision, values focus groups next Wednesday. And that'll be followed, that day will be ended with our charters presenting to our board and working with the board to complete that process. Hospital week is coming up, May 7th through the 13th. We have a full slate of events scheduled for hospital week. We'll be putting out information in the calendar. But I'll go through it quickly. Monday, we're doing kettle corn. It's a crazy sock day theme. Tuesday is a staff breakfast with the Watsonville Hospital Spirit Day. Wednesday will be the ice cream social with crazy hair and hat day. Thursday will be nachos and a salsa contest and sports team day. Friday will be shaved ice with a Hawaiian beach theme. And Saturday, we're going to cap the week off with a barbecue, family barbecue at Willow Park, which you will all be invited to as well. Serving the usual barbecue fare. That's the extent of my report.
Any questions for Michael? Thank you. Sounds like a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Do we see that going forward?
I have the slides.
Go ahead, Dawn.
I'm getting them.
Okay.
Can you see them?
So get them
Yes.
blown up.
Let me see. Let me
One copy for. Slideshow.
Can you see it?
It's working its way, but not yet. We got the front page.
It's on presenter view, not.
Can you see it now?
Not the right view.
It's on the presenter view, Dawn, so we're getting the notes.
Okay.
There's a display setting at the top.
From the beginning side.
Well,
I'll give it a go, Dawn.
That's right. Perfect. All right, anyway,
There we go.
first slide. then.
oh, I see what happened.
Hit it.
Did it? Okay. Well, I'm going to start consolidated financial performance. You can't really see it yet, but I will tell you we had a good month. We actually had a favorable EBITDA for the month of consolidated of $18,000, which I'll get into a little bit comparison to budget in the next slides, but comparison to the last month we had lost $893,000 EBITDA, and so it was a nice swing at 18,000 favorable. You will remember that in January, we had a $2.4 million provider relief fund payment. So when you look at the consolidated financial performance, you say, gee, the net revenue looks so much better in January. Once you take that out, you really see the improvement that we had in March in net revenue. We had a very strong month at almost $12,500,000. This view also includes in the purchase services, a payment to Chartis, significant payment to Chartis, as well as a contract true up for our older robot where we have to commit to a certain number of cases and true it up annually. So there were a couple of unusual items. Now, when we show the normalized EBITDA at the very bottom, we pull out really unusual kind of one-time items, but I did not pull those two items out. I left those in as a little bit more kind of normal operations. And I just wanted to point out that leaving those in and looking at that there was normalizing adjustments of about 180,000, that would really put us at normalized EBITDA of about 199,000 favorable. So good, strong month. Next slide. So this is the consolidated budget to actual. And so you can see, well, maybe what it says is that the budgeted EBITDA was to be 1.1 million unfavorable. And then after adding in the MPT lease of almost 400,000, we would have been 1.5 million unfavorable. Instead, with the MPT lease included, we're 363,000 unfavorable. So about $1.2 million favorable to what we have determined as the budget. And really, when you look at the various accounts, it boils down to what we've known all along about the net revenue being behind because of our payer contract implementations and the staging of it and some of the challenges we've had that we are working through. There's still a work in progress, but we have had some breakthroughs and received some of that money. Then we also, there's a bit of timing that's factored into the budget where things haven't hit exactly as they were timed, because our budgeting tools aren't really that sophisticated. And so there's
Yeah.
just some things that if I looked at it again, I budget it slightly different month over month. Okay, next slide. So on the hospital side, taking out that MPT lease, it's primarily, and without the clinic, what you see here is that our EBITDA was $78,550 for the month, as compared to a budget of minus $475,000. The operating expense is primarily driving a very favorable $1.4 million in favorable or less expense than budgeted, and about $860,000 towards the net revenue. We're really about $3 million in retro payments. So we are doing better than budget when you think about the fact that we're only $860,000 off. Next slide. Okay. Some of the revenue highlights, just kind of mentioned, consolidated work, which would include the clinic. We're $882,000 below budget for the month, bulk of that being in the hospital side. Our collectible net patient revenue was up 12%, and that's that 12 million that I talked about, as opposed to we've been running in the 10 and $11 million range. This month, our volume was less. We had budgeted higher inpatient days, so we were about 145 days below budget, which led to an unfavorable, and we had an unfavorable rate variance because we also had lower surgical volume. And when your surgical volume is down, that does tend to kind of bring down the overall revenue per inpatient day. Our outpatient volume continues to be strong, and we also have had favorable rate variances. So the outpatient is kind of carrying the inpatient per se. And ER volume, we're sitting at about 84 visits per day. So it's continued to be busy and the compete. Next slide. Expense highlights. Our labor expense, we're doing well controlling our labor expense. We're 6.5% below budget. Some of it's due to the volumes, but there's also been some good work on premium pay improvements. We've improved about 3%, shaped about 3% of the premium pay rate off in the last couple of months. And the supply budget, we're below by about 5%, and I think some of that is due to the lower volumes. Pro fees are significantly below budget. There was a prior month correction that kind of swung dollars in the opposite direction, and also the fact that we've budgeted for a new ICU contract that we haven't implemented yet. And then on the lease cost, one of the things we have discovered is that we did over budget our lease costs, our MPT expense, and it kind of ended up in both places. So I just look at that, both places, meaning the district and the hospital. So I look at that as a bit of a buffer for us for some, any unexpected things that might come up over the course of the year. So on a year-to-date basis, our operating expense is about $4 million favorable to where we thought we would be at this point of the year budget-wise. And just as a reminder, the first quarter is really front-loaded more with losing money and then kind of continuing to build and improve over the course of the year. Next slide. Really what this slide shows you is that all of our inpatient statistics were below budget. We've based our budget by looking at 3-year averages for most of the stats, and then trying to say what kind of percentage growth did we expect over what we were doing in 2022. So then when you spread it over the 3 months or over the year, try to spread it based on historically what percentage of total volume hit in March. So you always have a little bit of variation over the courses of the month. This month it felt a little heavier than I would have liked, but I think stat wise we're doing okay, and certainly revenue wise we are. We are continuing to see a higher case mix index, and while our surgery volume is low. It has recovered from where it was last month. And I actually, in doing some diving down, realized that the budget's been overstated. And so I would really say, while this shows us at 52 for the month, it really probably should have been about 72 in budget. And some of the overstatement has to do with the fact that we've also been layered on some volume for the cath lab and the robot. The robot didn't start till March. The cath lab is coming on later in the year. So it's somewhat of a volume spread issue and probably a little bit of budgeting mistake there. But probably the best news about this, which I typically wouldn't have if we had more robust budgeting tools where you are really driving your revenue estimates off of more specifically off of these stats, is we did not have that robust of a budgeting system. So being over budget on a stat is not as detrimental to the budgeting of the dollars. That's kind of the silver lining. Next slide. The outpatient stats, I kind of mentioned that ER visits were up, and so are just the non-ER visits. A little bit variance to budget, but continuing to grow. We had a good, strong month of outpatient surgeries at 108 outpatient surgeries. Next slide. This is colorful. Let me change my slides just to tell you what a couple of the colors mean. I had to write them down because I can't read that far. The green at the bottom, that's your general surgical volume. The kind of reddish brownish color right above that is your OBGYN type volume. And then the lighter orange is ortho. And then up near the top, the next green, that's a kind of a significant size is podiatry, and right above that brownish, goldish color is urology. So that's where the bulk of our surgical volume is coming from. Next slide. On the inpatient payer mix, really nothing to report here. It's fairly stable with what we've been seeing over the last few months. About 14% of our inpatient admissions were commercial admissions, and about 35% were our managed Medi-Cal, and about 30% of Medicare. Next slide. Outpatient almost didn't change it at all. We're still sitting, we actually had a little bit higher this month in the commercial at 21.6%. and about 45% of the managed Medi-Cal, and about 20% Medicare. So that's been very consistent month over month. And next slide. And then what I decided to do on the last slide is just kind of highlight a little bit more what was going on in the commercial managed care line of business. For the month, we had 39 admissions and 38 discharges, 111 patient days, and our length of stay was just under 3. And our case mix at 1.28 is not real acute there. Somewhat what you would expect if commercial people are keeping up with their own PCPs and taking care of themselves health-wise. That's typically when we start to look at some of these over the different payer mixes. That's sometimes where you see, depending on the access to care, the type of case mix and acuity of our patients. That is all the slides on the financial. Questions?
Great people, the whole world has seen that the positive content mark. There's not an anomaly, but it's different. Getting different. Very deal of work with there. So there's a little more. But on the surgery slide, the labor delivery that surgery, what falls into that category of surgery, that every surgery, that only surgeries that I'm trying to gauge that growth that at that we're having more.
It doesn't include the,
Oh,
I don't, that's.
Does that include C7?
So, okay.
Just do it.
Thank you.
You have a question about, just follow up on what Echo mentioned earlier about the line of credit foundation also. Present perspective. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Talk about the line of credit. At least I understand it's so unless it's at this point, but.
Sure. Generally, we want to pursue a line of credit to have a cushion, some cash in the bank, so we feel like instead of just having the cash that we're generating through our own patient revenues, which we know has been challenging at times as we're working through all the payer contracts getting implemented, we wanted to have a cushion of some cash. So, approaching the Santa Cruz County Bank and some of the groups like the Community Foundation and Driscoll's and that was around what could we put together given the fact that we don't own our own real estate, and so we don't have the normal collateral that many banks would be looking at. We have accounts receivable, and you can look at accounts receivable, but I met originally with the bank, and Brent brought in somebody else from a different division of his bank who said, well, we don't really do that, but I can refer you to somebody else. And then we started kind of down the line where I had already checked out looking at revolving lines of credit, which the hospital had before. I'm not sure exact time frame, but during the last few years, very expensive way to get credit, very restrictive. They basically sweep the dollars out as they come in, and you don't control your money at all. We really, wanted to try to avoid that and to be able to be more in control with how we were working the plan. So what I've done, and my next presentation will talk a little bit, is trying to show what was originally said the initiatives were going to be when there was fundraising going on to purchase the hospital, where we stand now with that. And it's really, it'll be an ongoing iterative, here's where we stand 3 months from now. But it was to give the community foundation, the potential donors, and then can use for donors too, but anybody who was hoping to maybe help us secure a line of credit to give them some faith in what we're doing and some comfort in how we're approaching things. Because really what we're hoping for is that the bank would be willing to give us a line of credit with some backing behind it, basically as like a co-signer, saying, rather than us going and spending a whole lot of money on a revolver, that you pay for the part you use, you pay for just like holding the money, and you pay for all this transactions that they want to do. We're just looking for basically like a co-signer.
Another question, please?
If I have the 5 days, an output of the online. So, I think giving the parents and the other person.
All right, thanks. Okay. Start with first sign.
Hold on, let me try to give it to the public too.
Well, I can start to talk a little bit about this. So when I met with this group, they did want to kind of understand what was being told when the Pajaro Valley Healthcare District project was doing the fundraising. They had presented, here's a bunch of initiatives that we think we're going to do to turn around the hospital. And here's, this is probably I think about July of 22. It's the date I saw where things were, this is what they were valued to be worth. And so the goal of this presentation is really to say, okay, what part of that stuck as is, what part changed, what was abandoned, what was added, and kind of give a little bit of gap analysis and set the stage for going forward. That kind of stays in the behind in the rearview mirror, and we're going to report against the projects that we actually budgeted and are are implementing it during this 2023 year. So just as a reminder, in 2022, you can go to the next slide. Or is it not going? Okay. Well, in 2022, the hospital lost over $30 million. So once the the district was formed and the hospital corporation took over as of September, the plan continued to be updated. And when I came in December, we put together the budget, and we budgeted, as you learned during my budget presentation, about $30 million worth of initiatives. And you'll see as we go through this that some of the original initiatives from the original plan were either abandoned or they were deferred for future years. Others were added, and we are on track to be successful. And so the end game is that our budgeted EBITDA for the hospital, and really this turnaround plan is about the hospital more than the consolidated entity, is that our budgeted EBITDA for the year will be $3.3 million favorable. The original projection had been $4.2 million. Next slide. So the plan had a number of kind of subcomponents. So the first component was about increasing revenue from the services that we already provide. And generally speaking, this was about overhauling the accounts receivable management, updating the payer rates that we charge, updating the rates that we charge for procedures, because some had not been updated in many years, and then renegotiating the payer contract that also had not been done in many years. That was kind of the initial plan. Those have all really stuck. Those are all things that are continuing to happen. So, and it was originally valued at $13.7 million. We actually budgeted for $18 million worth of these revenue improvements, made up of $5 million in overall improvements that touch coding, they touch denials, they touch improving collections. Our charge master updates, or the prices that we charge, we actually downgraded what that was worth to about $250,000. It had originally been estimated around $700,000. And then the payer negotiating contracts was originally estimated at $11 million. We budgeted it at just under $12 million, and it's going to come in, on an annual basis, slightly over $12 million. We'll be seeing all of the $12 million this year because we're implementing on kind of a staggered bit, so that we try not to disrupt cash flow too much, although we've had some disruption as we've heard in the past. So I'm going to just kind of tell you, it's really the hardest part, I think, about explaining this whole plan is how we're valuing how we are doing. We don't have sophisticated tools, so I chose a per adjusted patient day basis, and to value it based on the full year expected results, because even the timing of when things are going to happen is not always easy to predict, and then to say, well, we're only going to get this much per adjusted patient day in the first quarter and a different amount in the second quarter got complicated. So just said, if we, as a for instance, if we get $11,945,000 worth of payer contracts done, it's worth so much on a full year per adjusted patient day basis. So it really doesn't always factor in the timing of the initiatives that might occur later in the year. What it will mean to you when I show you variance to plan as a first quarter is that can be overstated. Whether it's a favorable or unfavorable variance, because it's really looking at how would you do after a full year. But I think this is where looking at our actual hospital EBITDA and how we're doing on our monthly financial performance is what's driving our conclusion that we're on track through the first quarter. Next slide. So this slide was about reducing hospital expenses. Some of this is a bit delayed because this is where we talk about the sales tax savings from a hospital not-for-profit status. We don't have that status yet. We've applied for it. We expect that later in the year. Once we get that, we can go back and do the work to get some of the sales tax that we've paid refunded to us. But that's one of those things that's not yet in any financial performance that we've received today. We also have the group purchasing contract, the Vizient contract that we're going to be implementing towards the end of this quarter, and because it's got about a 90-day implementation plan. We had, there was some work in the original plan about what they thought we could do to change position compensation related to some of our directorships and contracts. The amount was thinking that there were savings there that are not there. And instead, what we've done is actually budgeted the fact that we're going to change ICU groups. So we've added an expense. So that's why, if you could see this, you would see a minus 500,000 on the physician contract side, because that's actually an expense that we're tracking. And this is also where we had some of the salary labor type savings, such as reducing contract labor, reducing premium pay. And again, I've offset that with the fact that we still do salary increases, both for our exempt or our management represented employees, as well as our union employees, and that we have a plan to try to fill about, we budgeted to fill about 50% of what we considered open positions at the time of budget, knowing that between turnover and that you usually just never fill 100%. So those expenses are in there. So bottom line there, what was originally $9.8 million worth of expense reduction, with the pluses and the minuses of the expenses and the savings, is really about 1.2 million. But in this part of the plan, we're actually favorable to the plan, because we have been doing solid work on our labor expenses primarily, as well as some of the other expenses. Next slide. This slide was about creating new revenue streams by using our facilities. So this was some of the things about subleasing vacant space, optimizing the use through subleases to specialized providers. And in the original projection, this was one of those sections that had a little bit going on in the first year of 2023 and a lot more in the future years. So we're not saying that the future years are off the table or anything. This presentation is primarily about 2023. But the original plan had said 3.8 million in 2023. There's nothing that is budgeted for 2023. Nothing of our $30 million of initiatives. We are still, looking at things that we might do with that space. And so anything that comes of that, all I'm saying is that it wasn't part of our budget expectation. Next slide. Then we had additional opportunities to increase hospital revenues. So this is where opening the cath lab comes into play, as well as the just building up sort of the various surgery services here. So really the only thing that shows on this screen is the cath lab, because it has an investment in the first year of getting the equipment and the construction finished, and also a later start date in the summertime. We're really only showing $73,000 worth of favorable EBITDA here. The Da Vinci robot kind of fits in this section, but it wasn't something that I was able to pull out dollar for dollar. So it's really up in the first section where we talked about hospital revenues. Next slide. And then a section that wasn't in the original plan is what we've kind of called as the additional cost saving. And a lot of what this is about, $10.5 million is eliminating a lot of the transition costs, the legal fees, the bankruptcy costs, going through all the work that went through to look at contracts that were not assumed as part of the bankruptcy. Then we're looking to, pull out about $10.5 million. And then there's a little bit of added expense, very minor things that kind of offsets that. So this rolls out at 10.4 million. Next slide. So kind of leads you to the conclusion, at first you would say, well, gee, it seems like just looking at the numbers, the way I calculate them on a per adjusted day, that we might be $1.2 million off track. But again, that speaks to the timing and the fact that I built this based on full year expected results. So I really say, let's look at the March year-to-date EBITDA. And here, from a hospital perspective, budgeted to lose almost 2.3 million. We're favorable to budget 387,000. And so we're really $2.6 million ahead of budget, ahead of plan. And I think as the initiatives, roll out through the rest of this year, and we'll see another snapshot, say at the end of June related to this, we'll start to see some of that, the gap closing on what looks like the difference between original plan and current plan. So I hope that made some sense, because I realized as I put this together, I started thinking about how to talk about it, that it was easier said than done.
Any questions?
Cool. The one recap, this is one hospital have consolidated.
Yes.
Consolidated, the district has some. Together. You still have work to do.
Right, yeah. And to your point, this is focused because all these initiatives really touch the hospital level. But when you look at our consolidated budget for the year, it's actually an unfavorable number.
We'll be taking this as we build up our bandwidth. Getting cash flow model. Budget is one thing, is do better than budget, but at the end of cash here.
And we do have a cash flow model. I did not include it in here. And as I've sent this material out to some of the folks, I've included how we're doing cash flow, budget versus actual. We're actually doing very well there. We're kind of ahead of budget there. I've included our March financial results. I've included a little bit more detail about how this was calculated and kind of the comparison to the old. So.
Thank you, Julie, a lot of work. Okay, item number 7, recommendation to pass the motion to the medical executives.
I need to accept the report as presented.
I'll second that, Jay.
Second,
Was that Nunez that seconded?
Yes.
Thank you.
take a comment.
No,
No raised hands.
Or in the audience like to speak in the medical staff. Okay, done with the board.
Okay, Cox,
Yes.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Nunez,
Yes.
Pimentel,
Yes.
Chair Frail.
Yes.
Been a motion by Cox, seconded by Nunez. Motion passes unanimous.
Thank you for adjournment, thank you for everybody. We need to take a break before we